Cigars, rum, white sand beaches. It's what we think of when we think of Cuba. Now, as diplomatic relations are thawing between the U.S. and the largest of the Caribbean countries, the question is, what does it all mean for both economies?
Well, since President Obama announced his new plan for America and Cuba learning how to get along, it seems as every 10 seconds there's another major corporation falling over itself to start making plans for dumping billions in cash and workforce revenue into that tiny island nation. Let us now discuss the need to back up, not be so anxious, and what all this might mean for investors. Always a pleasure to welcome back the founder and chairman of SAFE, the Society to Advance Financial Education. Steve Beaman joins us. Steve, good to see you again.
Well, it's good to see you, Ed. It's always to be on a day like this. Boy, is there a lot to talk about.
We got a lot to talk about here, but specifically, let's start talking about money and what may or may not happen down in Cuba, because everybody, I think, needs to back up just a little bit here, Steve, because we need to understand the embargo is still in effect here. It's not as if right away we're all going to see everybody rushing and start putting in hotels in Cuba, correct?
That is correct. I think one of the things folks need to recognize is basically what we've said is let's take Cuba off the terrorist list. So this is not normalization of relations by a long shot, but it certainly is a step in that direction.
Is it not fair to say also that there have been companies, major companies here in America and also around the world, that have been making these plans? And if you want to go back, there are probably, if you wanted to go into the file cabinet somewhere, you could dust off something from 40 years ago from a lot of the major hotel chains and airlines who would have it already how to move into Cuba. They've been salivating for this for decades.
Well, that's right. And let's not be naive. The fact is the European countries have been flying into Cuba for years. I used to vacation down on Grand Cayman, and you could catch a flight to Cuba from Grand Cayman. So the economy's been involved in the world more or less, and American companies are just looking, saying, how can we get in there? A lot of the farmers in the country are singing, because if they can get in there, we're looking at somewhere around 500 million tons of wheat that could ship into Cuba, and that's a big number for American farmers.
Something else I think we need to look at as well, Steve, when we talk about this. People are missing the word infrastructure, because while we're talking about maybe building hotels, putting new cars in there, Cuba, in many ways, when you look at those buildings that are in Havana and other cities, beautiful facades, wonderful architecture, but behind it lies poor water systems, poor toilet systems, poor buildings, if you will, poor hotels. There's a lot. What are we talking about here to get in there and actually start rebuilding an infrastructure first?
Well, that's why I start with food. They're going to need our food and agricultural products first, but certainly companies like Caterpillar here in Illinois are looking aggressively at the infrastructure development that could take place in Cuba. Now, that preassumes the Cuban government has the hard currency to pay for it, which is a whole nother issue. But yeah, they're going to have to rebuild that country from the ground up. And American companies, being 90 miles away, are positioned to capture a large share of that market. But let's not forget, China is aggressively pursuing Cuba right now. You know, companies from around the world are going to be in there knocking at their doors more and more, because American tourist dollars will come down there, and that's going to be a huge boom for their economy.
All right, let's talk about a couple of other things here real quick, because the oil prices are falling. U.S. shale drillers maybe are looking to find what's happening here as the oil prices start to drop a little bit here. At least 6 companies are using a strategy that doesn't guarantee a minimum price if crude falls below a certain level. How do we put this all together then, looking forward into the future of what the oil prices might be in 2015?
Well, Ed, you and I have talked about the implications of the oil economy around the world, specifically how it benefits U.S. consumers, but it's also geopolitically dangerous because it hits those countries that rely solely on oil for their economies, specifically Russia. But right now, with such a significant drop from 110 a barrel down to around 56 where it is today, you're actually putting at risk the ability of some of these shale oil producers to profitably run at that level. I think they mostly need in the low 80s to run. And so you could see kind of a reverse thing where the supply now starts to taper off a bit to start to normalize those prices.
All right, and unfortunately, we are all out of time. I'm watching the clock here, and I'm thinking to myself, we have so much time to talk, but we're all out of time here right now. I want to remind everybody, too, that what have you got? By the way, you have any of the new, what's the word I'm looking for here? Any of your new, you have some internet broadcasts, I think, of SAFE that you have coming up from time to time,
Absolutely.
Correct?
We do the Master of Money program every Tuesday night at 7 Central at thesafesociety.net. We'd love to have everyone join us.
Okay, and I don't know what happened here, but all of a sudden, because it's Friday and it's late, my brain went into complete lock here. I felt like somebody was fracking and they just couldn't get through to the oil. There you go.
You gotta love live television.
It all happens in live television. See, we have those moments as well. Steve Beaman, thanks a lot for joining us, my friend. We'll talk again soon. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you and all the watchers of Newsmax.
All right, thanks so much. See what happens every now and then? Disappears. You got to come right back. Short break. We're back with the ugliest reason for the season, except, of course, for Ed's brain snap. And to end today's affair, of course, the political punching bag. It's all coming up right here on MidPoint.